All right. Supposedly we are live. People can watch us and stuff now. We'll see how many people join us. This is not our normal recording time, so people are probably not sitting by their computer waiting for us to start the broadcast. But our time constraints today were such that this was the time that made the most sense for us to record this episode. So here we are, season 6, episode 16 today. And I am joined by my amigo, Bryan with a Y, Eastridge.
Sorry, I forgot that was on the bottom of the screen name there.
Well, you seem to really want to make sure people don't screw that up.
It's like the number one ask, like at everywhere from Starbucks to McDonald's. Do you spell that with an I or a Y? And I'm like, does it really matter when you call my order? I mean, so I just get it out of the way early.
I see. All good. I'm going to just adjust my camera a bit. All right, there we go. Hopper, welcome. Will, thanks for joining us this morning. We're going to be having a really interesting discussion today. This is something that's been bouncing around in my head for a long time. I just didn't know if it was interesting enough. And me and Bryan were chatting earlier today, and we thought, no, this could be really valuable and a really good conversation. And so we're going to tackle this idea of phrases and commands that you should think about, that you should consider and potentially rehearse and even memorize and rehearse as part of your training in advance of a potential incident, any number of different types of incidents we're going to discuss today. And I brought on the cop because I think that there's a lot of these phrases that get coined and passed around the armed civilian community that cops hate, that are probably not doing us a lot of good. And so Bryan is here to correct me and maybe, fix some of these horrible phrases that we have been taught in the past. And so that's what we're going to be. Welcome, Eric, Scott. Thanks for joining us. For those who didn't already hear, our schedule's just off a little bit today. It's just a combination of factors. Riley's not going to be recording our podcast episodes this week. So we are sans Riley this week, and we're off our normal schedule as well. And so we're about 2 hours early on this beautiful Wednesday for recording our first episode. And Matthew Marister will be back this afternoon to record the second episode of the week. So that's what's going on. So we ready to get the official show on the road here? Bryan, you ready for it?
Sure, man.
All right, here we go. In 3, 2. I'm glad I didn't hit record before that annoying noise happened. In 3, 2, 1. This is the Concealed Carry Podcast, Season 6, Episode 16. Welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast. I am your host today, Jacob Paulson. We are without Riley Bowman. And today we are going to be having a great discussion. And I brought a friend with me, Bryan Eastridge of Oklahoma City. Welcome, Bryan.
Hey, how's it going, man? Been a minute.
It has been a minute. Certainly been a minute since we did a podcast episode together. And so it's going to be interesting. I thought Bryan's perspective, coming from a career in law enforcement, and that being a family legacy, as it were, would be really valuable in the conversation we're going to have today. We're going to be talking about phrases and commands that you should rehearse as part of your training. And I'm really excited about this. It's something that's been on my mind for a while. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is sponsored by CCW Safe. I picked that one because, well, A, they're the sponsor, and because B, Bryan, you have strong feelings about that company like I do. If you care about not just winning the physical fight that might interrupt your life one day, but also winning the aftermath of that, the legal fight, I strongly encourage you to join CCW Safe. Of all the competitors in that space, I think they have the best product, and I certainly think that they're the best people that are going to be able to come to your aid. So please learn more about that at ccwsafe.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by the Guardian Conference, guardianconference.com, the best ROI for your investment in getting better trained and educated and prepared for self-defense incidents that you could do this year. We'll be in Oklahoma City this fall, September 16th, 17th, 18th, and we're really excited about the conference. There's a bunch of pictures and video that have been added from last year's conference. If you want to get kind of a visual idea of what it's going to look like, what it might be like, I encourage you to go to the website And there's 2 different videos right on the homepage. So scroll down and watch those. And I think that'll give you a little bit of an idea. If you've been on the fence, go check that out. We're grateful for all the sponsors of that event. And specifically today, I'll highlight Throom Targets, who is a sponsor of the Guardian Conference. Thank you, Throom Targets. All right. You ready, Bryan?
Yeah, man.
So we're going to do this thing, and we're going to talk a little bit about this, and I'll introduce it this way. I think that in the moment when you're just flustered, it could be because you've just been pulled over by one of those copperoos, and that's a bit of a stressful situation. It could be because you just pulled out your gun and thought you were going to die, and you had to to press trigger a few times. That's a pretty stressful situation. It could be because someone jumps out from behind a dumpster and freaks you out, and you think that they might be about to slit your throat, and you don't know what their intentions are. That's a pretty stressful situation. Any number of things in life that cause great stress put us in a position where it's difficult, based on what I know, Bryan, you can speak to your direct experience, but it's difficult to formulate words and get out sensible things, but yet it's also highly important to say the right things to manage those environments. Bryan, you have a lot of experience in those kinds of stressful environments. Is that a common thing you see? People just can't get the right words out?
Oh yeah. And it's not just the armed citizen either. I don't know if you saw the video of the hatchet wielding criminal it's probably been a week ago, that attacked the officer that was on a traffic stop randomly. If you watch that full video, you'll see a lot of physiological effects of a massive amount of terrifying stress on the officer. And he says some phrases out loud that I know he was probably saying to himself in his head. At one point he says, "Don't fire," as he's covering the suspect on the ground. And I'm like, there's no other explanation for that than he just got a massive adrenaline and stress dump, right? So having some modicum of rehearsal of that beforehand is only going to benefit you in the long run, right? I think you froze up. All right, everybody, if you're still, sorry, I just got a message from Jacob. If you're still watching here, he had a power outage and he will be back shortly. So, just going to be me for a couple of minutes here. John Habercamp's here. How you doing, John? Guy Austin, of course. Good to see you, buddy. We still got to get together for dinner. Yeah, Jacob had a little power outage there in Colorado, so going to hang out with me here for just a few minutes. So, anywho, the topic of today is like phrases you should know, or at least be familiar with, or have some manageable experience with. And on the law enforcement side of things, we rehearse phrases quite a bit. And most of you all have probably seen those. But on the armed citizen side, it can be just as important, and it can be a very determine the outcome, or how the outcome goes, pretty well. So as soon as Jacob gets back, we have a whole show's worth of things to unveil for you here. So hopefully he will be back shortly. Coastal Georgia. Awesome. Man, people from all over the country. I see Gilbert, Arizona. This T-shirt should look familiar if you're from Gilbert, Arizona. Let's see, North Carolina. I was just out in North Carolina a couple weeks ago taking Tom Given's class, so a lot of fun. And, yeah, standing by for Jacob. All right, guys and gals, let's see. Still got 15 people watching, so as soon as he gets back in here, we will kick back off again. and get into the minutia. Roswell, New Mexico. Hi, Sherry from Roswell. I've been to Roswell, New Mexico. It's quite an interesting town. Georgia. All right. Got a good crowd. Appreciate that. But let's see. Got a couple of episodes on the Off Duty On Duty podcast getting ready to drop. Recorded one last night. And there's Tim Kelly. I was just at his facility, Apache Solutions, out there in Yadkinville, North Carolina. I spent several years there at Fort Bragg, and there was a Yadkin Road that was like the main service road through the post. And when I didn't know there was a Yadkinville, and then got to go out there with Tim Kelly and his great group of dudes and do Tom Given's instructor course. So it was a good time, great facility, and a great bunch of dudes. So yeah, it was a fun experience. Did Colorado get nuked? I don't think Colorado got nuked. I think his power just went out in his neighborhood for a second. So hopefully, barring any other other technical difficulties, he'll be back in just a few minutes. Let's see. What all do you have going on? Well, I have a fairly busy schedule from now until the Guardian Conference. Guardian Conference is coming up September, I think it's 16th, 17th, to 18th this year in Oklahoma City at the Oklahoma City Gun Club. And got some instructors from last year and some new ones that are coming in, like AJ Zito and Mick Shook are coming in. And should be a riotous time shall be had by all. But no, it was a great conference. I kind of am a bit spoiled by it because I don't even have to stay in a hotel. I just drive in every day. And, food, water, and Gatorade, breakfast and lunch are provided. So, it's a good time. Google user from Dallas. Hopefully your partner will be back soon. Yeah, me too, because I'm kind of running short on talking points here. Fun fact, Jacob and I were both born in Rock Springs, Wyoming. I've never been to Rock Springs. I've been to Seminole, Cheyenne, and up there in Cody. So, but yeah, the Belt Company will be back, and several other sponsors will be there this year. I don't think the pandemic has knocked out some of the sponsor staff, so it should be a good time.
Am I back?
And you're back. Thankfully, I was just about to run out of words to say.
Talking to yourself gets old real fast.
Yeah, I get it. But thanks for John Haverkamp, who and Guy and Tim Kelly for feeding me a little talking point there. So
I had to go plug the modem into my backup power.
Oh no!
And since I'm on a laptop, the laptop's fine. It's got battery all charged up. So I'm powerless right now, but we can continue because backup power.
Yeah, you got some editing to do. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that now. But
that's okay. Editing can be done. Life is full of editing. We're constantly editing everything in life. I edit my memories just to make sure I stay happy. So, awesome. So Bryan, you were talking about that incident with the dude with the hatchet and how the guy was talking to himself and how it's stressful. So I don't know if you finished that thought, but if not, can you kind of restate that for me?
Yeah. So that incident, which ended up in a deadly force incident, officers on a traffic stop having a very non-confrontational encounter with a motorist, and another driver pulls up right next to him, jumps out with a hatchet, and decides he's going to assault the officer. And luckily, the officer was pretty keyed up that this is not okay. And the first thing he says is, "Who are you?" It was the first phrase I remember hearing. It's like, who are you, man? I've been in that situation before. I've been attacked on a traffic stop. It was the weird, random thing that just showed up. So he was obviously prepared for it, and he positioned himself well. And after the shooting is over, you hear him utter some phrases like, "Don't fire." Well, where does that come from? Like that is something that is a subconscious thought that has made its way through the brain channels and been verbalized because of the massive amount of stress and adrenaline that just befell this guy, right? And there were several things after the incident that he kept saying, like, I don't know who that guy, I don't know who that is. I don't know what, like, the guy just jumped out and attacked me. And you could tell the stress level was extremely high. And then, you know, he starts to get a little emotional and everybody kind of like, are you okay? And, but that was a police officer. That's somebody who's trained. That's somebody who has been trained to, you know, at least to some degree and tested to handle a situation similar to that. Right. But he had all these phrases coming out of his mouth that there's really no explanation for other than he was just under a great deal of stress. Right.
Well, and I think that it's probably viable to suggest that police officers get a little bit more stress inoculation. They get more opportunities to be in those environments where they feel that stress. And so maybe it gets a little bit easier over time to be able to articulate the environment. Whereas the average armed citizen like myself, you know, it might be a rare occasion that I deal with a traffic stop, let alone pulling my gun and pressing a trigger at somebody. So it's the kind of thing that really does fluster one. And in the moment where it's most important to verbalize certain things a certain way, it's the moment where it's most difficult to verbalize certain things a certain way. And so I think the direction of our conversation today is to not give you some sort of cheat sheet necessarily, but to certainly give you some ideas of phrases or commands that you might write down and say, oh, you know, I really like that one. I really like, you know, Bryan's idea about saying it this way. I'm going to write that down and I'm going to think through that. I'm going to rehearse that. I'm going to utilize that in my training. I'm going to repeat that 10 times before I go to sleep one night. So, you know, this might be an episode as you're listening or watching this episode today, you might get out a pen and paper and you might be prepared to, you know, jot some things down as we go through them and you know, things that you particularly like or enjoy. So Bryan, I think that we kind of decided to break this into 3 categories. You know, category 1 will be sort of trying to stop an assault. Category 2 will be traffic stop with law enforcement officer or confrontation with law enforcement officer. And category 3 will be immediate aftermath with responding law enforcement after an assault, after an incident has ended. So I'll let you pick, man. Which of those do we start with?
Let's start with stop and assault. I like that one.
Okay, stop and assault. So, you know, this is that moment where I think I got a threat of some sort and I'm trying to stop it and or de-escalate it. I'm hoping I don't gotta resort to trigger pressing, but there's some things that are probably important here. Things that come out of my mouth should achieve a couple of objectives in my mind. I want to hear your input in a minute, but I think that my primary objective is to stop the assault, to de-escalate this, to resolve it immediately. So things coming out of my mouth hopefully are oriented toward that, to getting this assault to stop. But also, the words that are coming out of my mouth may have impact later in a courtroom when I'm trying to justify my actions and say, hey, you know, this is how this escalated. This is how I made this decision to grab my knife or to deploy my whatever. And so if witnesses can get up like, you know, I heard that dude, I heard the defendant shout such and such, that could be pretty impactful in the narrative that is painted. So what are some of your thoughts about that scenario and the value and importance of what's said?
Yeah, the main thing is look at the second and third order effects of your verbiage, because that's going to be documented somewhere. That's going to be, you know, the whole world is on camera now. Everybody's got a cell phone in their pocket, and the verbiage that you use could be construed 101 different ways, as well as the way that you say it. You know, one of the things that it's not necessarily a pet peeve of mine, but you know, stop. That word, stop. Well, stop what? Stop a car? Stop stop breathing? Stop living? What are you saying stop to? You know, and what actions are creating the need for you to say stop doing that? So that's one that I think is kind of a default phrase that people use. Hey, stop. And it's not necessarily a good conveyance of what your intent is, um, or what your intent to try to prevent is. Does that make
Mm.
sense?
That's interesting. Because actually, Bryan, you're making me question my whole life here, because I've always thought of stop as a really solid, good word because of its simplicity. It's one
Hmm.
word. And so if I'm trying to articulate something quickly that is probably easy to get out of my mouth when my heart is pounding, stop should be at the top of my easy list. It's easy to rehearse in advance. I can verbalize it a certain way. We talk about that in a minute. But you're making me rethink that, right? Because if later someone, it'd be really easy for a prosecutor to say, well, when he said stop, you know, my client thought he was talking about stopping this other thing, right? It's not terribly specific,
Right.
and so it may be problematic to painting the right picture.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a good word to have in your toolbox there. But it if you look at the second and third order effect, like, well, what did you do before you shot that guy? Well, I told him to stop. Well, stop what? What was he doing that made you say stop? And then you have, 9 witnesses that go, yeah, what did you hear? Well, I heard stop, and then I heard a bunch of gunfire. Well, who said stop? Was it the guy that got shot saying stop, don't shoot me? I mean, it just leaves a lot to the imagination, right? You know, stop walking towards me. You're being aggressive. Stop. Something more, a little more descriptive to kind of set the tone or the context of the incident, right? Um, one of my favorite phrases to use, and I've used this one off work and at work, is "get away from me," because think about the visual imagery of that a little more second and third order, right? Well, what did you hear from random citizen in the crowd? I heard somebody say, get away from me." Well, what kind of imagery does that put? Well, that means that person that maybe has just suffered a grievous wound from a armed citizen or a cop or whatever it is, he was doing something that he was encroaching on that person. He was making an advance on this person versus stop. Well, it leaves a lot to the imagination, right? Get away from me.
What about back off, Bryan?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think coupled with some additional description, and I think that's where we kind of lose sight of things. Is Yeah, it's great to have the word stop. It's great to all these other little micro phrases, but if you don't add a descriptor to the end of it, it can
Mhm.
really get lost in context.
Yeah. This is great. This is great food for thought. If you're listening to this right now, you might be thinking, "Oh, geez, there's maybe more to this than I thought." And our intent is not to get you scrambled in your brain. The intent here is to get you to think through some of the implications, so that you can pick some phrases that you think are going to work in a lot of situations, and rehearse those, make them part of your training. So get away from me. Get away from me.
Hmm.
Bryan, this is also a situation, this one we're talking about, kind of preventing the assault, de escalating the situation, where tone and pitch and command of voice become highly relevant. Share some thoughts you have about that.
Yeah, I think trying to be ginger about a suspect, or a little more, or not a suspect situation, a little more cautious about it, like saying, "Hey, step back." Well, that's a very confrontational phrase. If I'm not someone of authority and I tell you to do something, it immediately becomes a conflict, even though I've said it in a really low tone of voice. Hey, step back a little bit. Now, if I'm in a uniform and I have some official capacity there, and I say, "Hey, buddy, you mind take a couple steps back for me? Like, I've got a situation here and I need a little space." Okay, that's maybe not as confrontational, but I'm walking you know, my gal and kids through the park, and some guy encroaches on me, and I say, "Hey, take a couple steps back for me." That's fighting words, right? Well, you don't have any authority over me. Why would I listen to you? So you could be trying to de-escalate that, and in effect completely escalate it to the point of physical assault just by the words you say. right? That makes sense. Like
Yeah, that's totally valid. And that's also, I think that we also have to be cautious because there's some cultural nuance here. A phrase that works real well in Houston, Texas might not play so well on the streets in New York City. And so, knowing the audience a little bit is also, kind of relevant, and thinking through that and, a little bit, and looking for the most universal phrases we can think of that are, going to work.
Right. And yeah, you talk cultural differences. I'll throw a cultural example in there that happened to me at a California pizza kitchen in Southern California on a vacation. My spouse walks through the door, and I hold the door open for her like a good dude does, right? And there's a young lady behind her, and I stand there and I hold the door, and I'm like, "Hi, how you doing?" And she freezes and like backs up. I'm like, what's going on here? Like, I'm holding the door open for you. That's what people in the Midwest do, man. It's just part of our thing, right? We try to be gentlemanly and courteous, and it's kind of it's a sign of courtesy, and like, this person has good manners. Well, in California, it means, why is this crazy dude holding the door open for me? Like, and I was like, okay, well, I'll walk in first. And then I reached back to hold the door open so she could come through it, and she wouldn't. And I'm like, this is the United States. Like, and it's two vastly different cultures right there in full display. And so it was an odd moment, to say the least. And I'm like, well, I'm going to feel bad the rest of the week just letting the door slam behind me. But I guess that's the way they operate here. That's like, so yeah, I mean, cultural differences. Have you seen the Deputy Dinkiller video? This was from Georgia, or constable.
I don't think so.
It's traffic stop, and the guy loads an M1 carbine and kills the officer.
Yes.
One of the things I learned about that incident was that officer had said, "Hey, take your hands out of your pockets," which is a very innocuous phrase that a lot of cops use. Hey, keep your hands out of your pockets for me. Appreciate that. And he does it in a very non-confrontational way. But that gentleman was so keyed up on this like warrior culture that was an absolute insult that this younger man told him to take his hands out of his pockets, and it ultimately resulted in a fatality. So there's a cultural reference that ultimately escalated. So yeah, I think those are things you need to be aware of when you're being the responsible citizen carrying a gun in public. So
yeah. In these situations too, I think that rehearsing and making these phrases part of your training means considering how you say them. So tone matters. So for example, "Get away from me," one that you suggested that I really like, I'm latching onto that a little bit, is very different if I say, "Hey, can you get away from me?" versus like a very forceful, like, "Get away from me."
Right.
And we're, those who have been involved in the self-defense game for a while, and I imagine most of you listening to this, we understand that it's also a question of communicating what kind of person you are.
Mm-hmm.
We see this especially a lot in, a lot of the, female never be a victim kind of training, refuse to be a victim stuff, where baked in the curriculum, we teach this idea that you don't want to appear to be an easy victim, and portraying a personality of forcefulness and strength and confidence also makes you look like a more difficult victim. And so the way we say those things really matters. And it's one of those things, like when we're doing a force on force scenario, for those of you who've done force on force training, it's really interesting to me how little is said. So when you do a debrief, next time you guys do a force on force scenario, or if you can think back to some force on force you've done recently, or if there's videos you can review, it is remarkable to me how little is said. Like almost every time we'll get done with force on force scenario, and I'm like, "Well, did you give him any commands?" And our defender will be like, I don't know. I don't think I did. Or I think I said stop, or, whatever they might have think that they said. But almost without fail, the answer is no, you didn't. Like all of us who are watching can tell you words never escaped your lips, because the brain is so wrapped up in what am I seeing? How do I need to react? What's going on? Is there another attacker? Oh, does that a knife in his hands? I'm not sure. Is that his phone? There's so much like computing happening that the mouth like just shuts off. And this is the moment when it needs to be used.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And even my little pet favorite phrase, "Get away from me." If you and I are sitting, within earshot at the table, and I look across and give you a stern look and say, "Get away from me," at a very low tone of voice, that becomes fighting words, right? That
Sure.
escalates the situation. Whereas if we're already at the point that there's getting ready to be a confrontation, and I very loudly verbalize that, that maybe is an indicator that I'm not somebody to be trifled with, right? And we're already past the point of interpersonal conflict. Now I'm telling you, get away from me, or bad things are going to happen. Like, this is not going to go well. So the context of any phrase can be, can be shifted in a number of different directions. That just happens to be one of my favorites when you get to the level of things are getting ready to not happen or they're going to go down. Mm-hmm. Because that clearly expresses your intent, or you're not going to get trifled with here. You're not going to be a victim here. I live in a very urban area, and we have a pretty high homeless population, and a lot of them are pretty harmless, so to speak. But if they start to encroach and you say, "Get away from me," all of a sudden it's like, "Oh, hey, I'm not going to hit you up for $1." Like, or it's, okay, that means the incident has started. And I've seen that go both ways with people. But that one is very clear to me, because anybody that's in earshot of that hears that and goes, "Uh-oh, someone was trying to get in their space." And that's not okay with anyone, right? That from just using the simple phrase, "Stop." Stop what? Stop walking, stop moving, stop breathing. What do you want me to stop? And then "get back" is another one of my favorites.
Get back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, same thing about space. Hey, I need more space. You're encroaching. It's very similar to "get away from me." Yeah, that's good stuff. So, for those of you listening to this, you might have other ideas of other phrases that you might like or that you think are good, but we've given you some things to think about. What are the implications when people, are reporting, witnesses are saying what they heard? How are we saying those things? At what point in a conflict is that particular phrase that you're thinking about appropriate? It makes a lot of sense versus, at a different point in a conflict, is that just escalating the issue and making it worse? So those are good thoughts. Let's transition, Bryan, to one of our other two scenarios here. What should we play with next? Law enforcement confrontation or post-incident? I guess both are kind of law enforcement confrontations, but one's more serious than the other.
Yeah, let's talk post-incident for a minute.
Okay. So our context here is something's gone down. The incident is over, more or less, and maybe shots have been fired or maybe not. It's really not terribly relevant, but now the Bryans of your world are showing up in uniform and badge and saying, "Hey, I got a job to do, so I'm going to do my job, and I got to talk to these people." Before we get into any of our specific thoughts or recommendations, I'm going to allow us to just debunk one of my favorite horrible myths in the game, and that is this idea that we should all memorize the following phrase. And I hate this phrase, Bryan, but I'm going to let you give your own commentary. But it's along the lines of, "I feared for my life and the life of my loved ones." What do you think on that one? Because I've been hearing that one for decades. We've been telling people to memorize that one.
Yeah, I think that's a good one for a post interview. Maybe like, under advice of counsel, like that. Okay. If I've got my attorney sitting next to me and this summation of the entire day's incidents is, "Hey man, I was scared for my life and my family's life." After I have explained in great detail under advice of counsel over here, the reasons that fear was present. But just, bad guy laying on the ground, I'm the good guy. And I go, "I was in fear of my life and my family." I'm like, one, that sounds canned, and two, that sounds like you're immediately trying to justify the outcome of the incident without putting any context to the incident. And the context of the incident is where people get criminally prosecuted, right? Makes sense. That's why we have things like CCW Safe and other companies out there, right?
And what I hate about this phrase is, one, it's not universally applicable.
Mm-mm.
You might be talking about an incident that had nothing to do with your life or the life of your. I mean, if I'm out in the street, my family's back at the house, like, then why am I even saying that? It's not even relevant. So that's one challenge I have. I hate the fact that, like you said, it sounds extremely canned. Officers know when crap is canned, right? They're like, oh my gosh, really? It also sounds like I have a lot of control. If I'm able to skip over all this stuff and I'm just saying, I was in fear of my life, and I want an attorney, that concerns me. If I was the officer, I'm not, in case anyone's wondering who's listening, I'm not a cop. I've never been a cop. I just can only assume what a Bryan would be thinking, but it would sound like, okay, this guy's got a lot of control to immediately start reading off the card in his wallet, this little bucket phrase that everyone's told him to say. But the real beef I have with that particular phrase is that our industry seems to think that it's magical. Like, if I say these words, I'm for sure good to go. Like, they're not going to arrest me. I can't be charged. If they do, I'm for sure going to be found innocent because I said this magic phrase when they showed up. Like, and that's the problem, is this like inherent belief that this phrase is magical and it will for sure just immediately justify all my actions, no matter what they were.
Yeah. And that is ultimately what gives you the ability or to defend yourself, right? Is I was scared for my life or the life of this person that's dear to me.
So it's a major contributing factor.
Right. Well, right. You summed it up perfect. That's a major contributing factor. Well, if the context of the incident doesn't support that, it doesn't matter what phrase you just said.
It doesn't even matter if you were really in fear. What matters is if a reasonable person in your shoes would have interpreted the situation to be one of immediate threat of death or serious bodily injury. So it's just, nothing about it is magical. It has no actual legitimate bearing on the outcome of your legal circumstance. And it sounds extremely canned, and it might not even be relevant to the situation.
Right. And one of the viewers here just typed, it sounds premeditated. Mm-hmm. And that is, that's something we don't, that you don't hear a lot of people talk about, but absolutely sounds premeditated. And a cop rolling up in the first phrase out of your mouth is, I was in fear of my life and the life of my loved ones. Well, you've thought about this quite a bit, haven't you? Like, you've thought about what you were going to say when that incident, that's the first thing. Even if I'm not a cop, let's say Joe Citizen walks up on that scene and you look at Joe Citizen and say, I was in fear of my life and the life of my loved ones. Joe Citizen, a reasonable person, is going to go, that sounds like you've been waiting a long time to do that. Yeah, make sense?
Yeah, not bueno. So let's talk about some things that might be more appropriate. The first thing that comes to my mind when we talk about incident aftermath, Bryan, is that I understand from my limited legal knowledge that while I have a right to be silent from the Constitution of the United States, that it's not as simple as that. And a lot of people, I think, are under the false impression, as I understand it, that nothing I say matters until I've been read my rights. Right. Oh, until the officer reads me my rights, nothing that comes out of my mouth can be used against me. That's obviously not the case. I know that that's not the case. I think the average person listening to this podcast hopefully knows that's not the case. We've had legal experts on to discuss that in the past, in past episodes. But it is important at some point to somehow invoke that right of silence. Because once I invoke that right, at that point, things that come out of my mouth are protected to some degree. So talk to that a little bit and give us some ideas of what might be appropriate verbiage.
Well, from my own experience, I've rolled on several serious incidents and had, the victim of a violent crime say, oh my God, I just stabbed that guy. Well, that is absolutely admissible. There is I'm not detaining you. You're not in custody. That's another thing that, legal experts could talk to this point way better than I can. But in my limited knowledge, if I don't have you detained, if you are not under my supervision, control, and quote, in custody. Meaning I've taken you from where you're at and put you in a police car, an office, somewhere where you're not allowed to leave. Any utterance you make is admissible until the point that I say, okay, I need to speak with you and I'm going to take you into custody to do that. That's when I have to read you your rights. That's when I have to inform you about them. Even in a cursory investigation, meaning, hey, we don't know what happened. I look at someone and say, hey, can you tell me what happened? And if the first thing they say is, yeah, that guy attacked me and I killed him, that's all admissible. There's no, well, I hadn't read them their rights. They get that. Yeah, I can't. I got to ignore that phrase now. No, that's absolutely 100% legal in the playing field of criminal investigation, right? Now, from that point, I'm pretty well obligated to go, stop what you're doing. We're going to go over here. I'm going to put you in this police car. And now you're in custody because now I know that you've done that. Whether it's criminal or not, we'll determine later. But yeah, any utterance you make as soon as the cops show up, that's going on a piece of paper that's probably documented on a body camera. So, so yeah, that whole Miranda rights, that's an in custody interview, right? And you have the right to not self-incriminate. Yeah, and that comes out as the right to remain silent. Yeah, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to. You're not compelled to. But if the overwhelming evidence is, well, you just murdered that person, and there's no context to support any of the other, you're rolling the dice with whether you should make a statement or not. And that's where I default to, man, I better call somebody to represent me to navigate this process, right? And it's the same way for police officers. You're going to tell us what happened. You're going to give us your perception of what happened. And a lot of police officers, that's a compelled statement. So that's a whole nother arena of legality that the armed citizen doesn't have to play in. So,
so Bryan, then understanding all that context, understanding some of those legal parameters, let's talk about phrases that might be appropriate. So something I hear a lot of firearm instructors suggest, and there's a comment here as well, and I've definitely heard this many times, is this idea of using some language to invoke the right to remain silent. I invoke my right to be silent, kind of thing, or I'm not saying anything until I get my attorney, or some of these kinds of things. From the perspective of the cop, some of these things are going to come off as pretty rough, little confrontational, sort of like it's me versus you now. What are some variations of that, or what might you recommend to people as a phrase that would be really, really good?
That very soft language, and I mean humanized language. You got a group of cops there, and you've just been involved in an incident, and maybe you've deployed your firearm, maybe you've even just drawn your firearm, and that caused the incident to stop. Right? Here's a group of cops that are, hey, we got to investigate a crime here, and you go, hey guys, gals, I'm more than happy to talk to you, but I need to get my representative here, and just, hey, you got to handcuff me, put me in the car, take my gun. I get it, no problem for me. And I know that's pretty lengthy, but it's like, try to be human, try not to be robotic. And you really can't put a phrase on that that's very simple, but it's like comedians say, read the room. It's like if somebody's being a pretty forceful jerk about it, then there's no sense in trying to be human about it. It's like, I'm not going to talk to you without an attorney. Just let me know where we need to make that happen. And then say nothing else. Like if it's going down that road, whereas, the cops show up and go, hey, are you all right? Can you kind of give us an idea of what happened? Hey, the suspect ran that way. I really don't want to say much more if I don't have an attorney with me. I'll give, hey, here's the description. Here's what the guy looks like. Here's where he's going. Here's where he went. He said these things to me, but the right to not self-incriminate is, tell him the detail of, well, I pulled my gun out and I pointed it at his face and he took off running. Well, you've committed a crime. You've committed a crime that is exempted through statutory language, right? Okay, well, you were in fear, so that was a reasonable explanation for why you took the actions you did. That is where people get convicted. That's where people get criminally prosecuted, is in the context of why that happened, right? It's the perception of why that happened. So there's the dangerous part of that encounter after the fact is, hey, maybe I don't want to give too much detail here. Maybe I just want to give enough detail that they say, hey, we're going to have to take you down and interview you. Okay, no problem. Hey, I need to get my representative with me. You don't have to say attorney. As soon as you say attorney, most cops go, oh, great. Here comes the cheap suit defense attorney that's going to walk in here and cause us nothing but issues. You say a phrase like representative, I'm going to have to get my representative here before I give a detailed statement. That's pretty disarming, right? That doesn't conjure the imagery of like Saul Goodman showing up and telling the cops where to go and how to get there, right? That sounds like, I'm part of your team. Just let me get my rep here so that we can we can unwind this situation and dive into the minutia.
Yeah, I like this. I think we have other episodes dedicated to this idea of, the general camp of say nothing, say little, or say everything. And I think that most people agree that say everything is a bad idea in the moment. So you kind of get left with the two different ideas of, well, say nothing or say a little. And it becomes a question of control. And I think that Bryan and I today, the context or the idea or the argument we're trying to make for you guys, our viewers and our listeners, is that the more of these phrases you can kind of have in your memory bank, rehearsed in advance, the better. And so, for example, Bryan, based on your suggestion, something that I could work on and think through in advance is something like, no offense, officers, but I'd like to have my representative, here before I give any sort of statement.
Yeah.
That's not that long. It's not that lengthy. I'm practicing it with the right tone that I would use in the moment versus the get away from me. I'm going to practice that, differently in the appropriate tone for that scenario, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm rehearsing in advance. I'm thinking through that. Rehearsing matters. That's the point here of this episode, guys, is that this is not just about, well, here's some smart things to say. Like, yes, we're trying to give you some ideas, but the real core, takeaway from this episode is rehearse it in advance. Decide on a few of these things that you like. Maybe a couple of them are going to have some insert, thing here, but decide on a few of these that you guys like and rehearse them.
Yeah. Daryl Balky, my dear friend Daryl, and I, we have this thing we call tactical daydreaming, right? And I know it sounds cheesy, but it is absolutely, it's absolutely relevant, right? When we would drive around in police cars, we would sit and think about what's going to happen if a stolen car pulls up to that stop sign. What am I going to do? What is my verbiage? What am I going to sound like on the radio? How am I going to, initiate a stop? If I get in a police car chase and it's going this direction, what street signs am I going to pass that I'm going to have to relay or convey? If somebody jumps out of that building and it's on fire, what am I going to tell the dispatcher that I'm seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting? How do I convey that? So he and I, miles apart and years apart in careers, we both do that like all the time, right? But that's something that not everyone does. And I do that when I'm walking to go get a burger. I think, okay, I'm going to take these streets. So if something happens between here and there, I know where I'm at. I can convey that. Well, what happens if somebody robs me? What happens if I see someone get robbed? All these things, you can go a lot of places in your mind without ever having to draw a gun, right? You can go through a lot of this scenario that doesn't take long, and just think about what you're going to say. Think about not only during the incident, but after the incident. Well, if I just had to display my firearm, but I didn't have to physically shoot someone, what am I going to say in the aftermath of that? What am I going to tell a dispatcher when I get on 911 or whatever the emergency services line? What verbiage am I going to use? Because here's a little clue. If you call 911, it's recorded forever and ever. Everything you say is recorded. Everything that you can hear in the background, all of that is admissible. So, it doesn't take a whole lot of time to go, if I walk out my front door right now and somebody comes up to rob me, okay, how am I going to handle that? What words am I going to use? Am I going to feign compliance? What am I going to tell the dispatcher? Okay, I'm going to tell him this happened. What am I going to tell the cop when he shows up? What's the guy wearing? What kind of clothes? And really start to play those things out in your mind. Tom Givens did an exercise in that in his instructor class. I won't give the full thing away, but it was just a visualization of an incident. And it was an incident one of his students had been involved in. And he plays it out in three different circumstances. And I'm like, man, I do that junk all the time. Like, this is just how I live my life to some degree. But some of the other people there were like, wow, that was really powerful. I'm like, yeah, that took 4 minutes of our life there to play out a scenario based on a real incident and think about all the different things that are going to happen before, during, and after. Right.
If we think it's important to practice the gun handling skills enough to take
Mhm.
classes and build some myelination there so that we can react accordingly and do it well, then we have to acknowledge that speaking is also a skill that also requires a certain amount of training and practice. And saying the right things matters a lot, both to the outcome of the incident and the outcome to the aftermath. Thank you, Bryan. Those are great thoughts. We're going to cycle back to kind of our last little category here, and I'm sure there's plenty of other things we could discuss in this topic. Our intent is not to give you a cheat sheet list of phrases. Our intent is to just give you some ideas of things so you can go build your own kind of cheat sheet of things that you want to rehearse and train and practice. But let's talk, Bryan, about law enforcement confrontations. This is a stressful thing for a lot of people, people who don't get pulled over as often as me. And I won't admit to any crimes publicly on the podcast. So that's all I can say about that.
Right there.
Yeah. But I really like traffic stops. Actually, I kind of find them entertaining. The takeaway here is that's a stressful environment. It's another place where we might need to have some thoughts. Two things kind of in my mind into kind of breaking this down. One would be maybe how I'm going to talk to the officer relative to informing them I have a firearm. Some states require that. It's a minority. Most states don't have that kind of a requirement. But as a general industry, as a community, we tend to preach that as a best practice. And the second thing that I'm going to take us to after we go through that one is talking about how we might answer the question, where's the gun? Any half-decent, half-brained officer who finds out that the person they're confronting has a gun probably really wants to know where that gun is. That becomes highly relevant, important information. And so they're going to inquire somehow about the location of the firearm. And answering that question, I think also is one of those things we might want to talk through. So give me the short gist of how I'm informing the officer that I got a gun.
Right. So let's set the stage a little bit on the background a bit. So as a cop, I have to see the infraction, and then I have to predict where you're going to stop so that I can relay that to my peers, partners, dispatchers, somebody that's going to come bail me out if something goes really bad. And that doesn't mean I get in a conflict with the driver. That means my police car gets hit. Your car gets hit. I get run over in the middle of the street, right? So there's a high degree. Yeah. So if you look at it from that perspective, not just, hey, I'm the driver and crap, what did I do? But think about all the things that are going on behind you. Okay. I got to position my car to where it's advantageous if we do end up in a gunfight. And it's also safe and protects you, the motorist in front of me. so that if a car hits my car, it doesn't careen into yours and kill you, right? These are all things that are going on in the background that you have. Most people probably, I'd say there's probably several listeners that have never heard some of these things, right? I've got to give tag information. I've got to give, vehicle descriptors, things like that, while I'm trying to drive, while I'm trying to pick the spot to do this, while there's traffic, for hopefully there's not semis at 80 miles an hour going by at the same time, right? All of these things play into that. And now I walk up, I'm already keyed up because here we are. Everything here is dangerous and I haven't even spoken to you yet. And now I walk up and you tell me you have a gun. Well, that's one of two ways. If the context of that is, I've got a gun, okay, that sounds pretty like we're getting ready to be in a gunfight, right? Versus, how's it going, officer? Just going to let you know, I'm carrying a firearm. I have my permit. I have, or if it's a constitutional carry state, hey, I'm carrying a gun, blah, 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 something disarming, so to speak, to kind of de-escalate the tension of, hey, this dude has just had to go through 800 things back here just to get where he's at. And all of them are dangerous and all of them can be catastrophic. Hey, I just to let you know, like, okay, I'm going to humanize because I care about you. Just going to let you know I'm carrying a firearm. Okay. Where's it at? What is your human instinct when someone asks you, where is it at?
The point and show is the natural reaction.
Point, grab, and show to someone who is keyed up that everything around them is about to kill them to conduct this traffic stop. So I like to say, keep your hands neutral, like on the wheel or somewhere, between my face and the wheel where they're very visible. Say, hey, my gun's in a holster, in an appendix rig, or hey, I'm wearing my gun on the right hip or the left hip, and maybe tilt your head that direction, but not your hands. Okay. Because I can't shoot you with my feet. Right. So if I say, hey, my gun, keep my hands up here and go, yeah, my gun's right down here in a holster. Well, then what's the next logical question? I need your driver's license, insurance, and if you got your concealed carry permit. Okay. They're in my wallet that's right next to my gun. Like, say nothing more. They're in my wallet that's next to my gun. Then you let that person drive the narrative and not you. That's one thing that the American male ego is not very comfortable with, is letting someone else take the reins of that situation and putting the obligation to act back on that person, meaning the cop, right?
Mm-hmm. So there's some good phrases there for us to rehearse. And it might even be worth rehearsing some of those things sitting in a car in the environment, because there's also physical movement things that become really relevant here, right? So things like keeping my hands on the wheel. The wheel's in neutral position. It's out here in front. It's something I can actually grasp, that I can hold on to, which maybe makes it easier to make sure my hands stay there versus if I'm just kind of floating them out. So there's, rehearsing that in that environment and having some of those key phrases works really well. So an example, taking, from what you said, Bryan, and just trying to kind of put it in some specific language. An example might be something like, hey, officer, just wanted to let you know I have a concealed carry permit and I'm armed. What do you want me to do next?
Yeah.
And something like that would be kind, respectful, informative. Where's the gun? Oh, officer, it's in my waistband. In the front on the right hand side, about 1 o'clock, appendix carry, right? I've kind of described the same thing 3 different ways. I've rehearsed that in advance. I'm, keeping my hands on the wheel. So if you're listening to this, guys, like, take some of these contextual ideas that Bryan is sharing and come up with some language you feel meets the objective here, which is respect, information, non-confrontational kind of language. And think through that and rehearse it a little bit and get good at it.
Right. And also something that, I think a lot of trainers discount is, okay, yeah, I gave you the the context of what the officer's going through. And I'm not giving away any trade secrets because it's all on body cam now. Like the whole world knows how that happens, right? Think about what the lights look like in the rear view and what your anxiety level is when you see that. Think about what it looks like when the spotlight hits your rear view mirror and you can't see what's coming up behind you. Right? I mean, that's a pretty unsettling feeling. Envision what that feels and looks like so that when it does happen, you can at least manage that anxiety factor of, okay, there's someone behind, they just turned the lights on. I've done some traffic infraction. So now I got to pull over. The last time I got stopped in Texas of all places, the guy bumped the siren. It was daytime and it scared the living crap out of me. I was like, whoa, oh man, I hope that, and my thoughts were, being the cop, I hope this guy hadn't been following me very long. Right. And because he's going to be ticked off that he's had to give his location out 6 different times, which gave me a talking point. And it turned out it wasn't even a traffic infraction. Like there were keys in my trunk. Guy was just trying to give me my keys back. That's happened to me once or twice. But the point being is I was like, okay, the first thing I'm going to say is, oh my gosh, sorry, I didn't see you back there. I hope you weren't following me along. And he goes, oh, are you a cop? I'm like, yeah, man, sorry, dude. Was it going a little quick or something? He's like, no, man, your keys are in your trunk. Okay, cool. But there again, like envision what is your physiological response when you see the lights and you hear the siren behind you, how that's going to key you up, and the officer's already keyed up, and some things that you can say to not be confrontational in that moment. I've had people that literally, sorry to use that word, but they physically couldn't talk when I walked up to the window, because they had never been stopped on traffic before. I'm like, it's okay. Calm down. Like, I just need your license and your insurance, and just like having to take one thing at a time. But on the other side of that, like being an armed citizen, you kind of have a higher degree of anxiety in that situation because you're armed, right? So little subtle things that you can do, like not reach for your insurance as you're getting pulled over, right? Maybe carrying your wallet in a place that you can reach down, get it, and put it in your hand when you pull over. That doesn't require a phrase to even remember, A lot of times I travel and I keep my wallet under my left leg because, the right leg's operating the pedals. So that way, if something happens, I reach down as I'm pulling off the side of the road, and I've got all my credentials right here. So I don't have to reach for anything. There's little subtle things you can do like that to I hate the phrase disarm, but to really take a lot of the stress and intensity out of that situation, right? That you can do without even having to speak. And then when you do speak, be very concise, but very human, right? Yeah. Apologetics always good. Sorry. Hey, sorry. don't know what I did, but
a little vulnerability,
a little like openness, human openness, like kindness goes a long way. Really hope you didn't have to follow me far. I just saw your lights, man. Really sorry. But back to that. Hey, I'm armed. I'm carrying a gun. And if you have your credentials in your hand, you don't have to reach for anything, right? But if you say, man, my wallet is in my right back hip pocket back there, and if I reach for it, it's going right next to my gun. How you want to handle that? I mean, I'm more than willing to get it for you, but do you need to get somewhere you can see it? Like try to be human about it. Like, hey, I don't want to get shot, man. You don't want me to, like, let's be on the same team here, right?
Yep. Love it. Guys, this is about all the time we have. We're going to start to wrap this up. I think that in summary, what Bryan and I are trying to convey is that there's a lot you can do in advance by thinking through some of these environments, by considering the context and the relevant impact of what you say and how it can, make things better or worse, and considering some key phrases or commands that might be highly valuable to you in these different contexts that you can train, you can practice and rehearse in advance, and that the value that could be to you is enormous. I think we could keep the conversation going. In fact, I was thinking about going back and looking at, we were talking about 911 calls. That's another one situation or environment that we could get into if we wanted. But our time is up for today, so this might be something we revisit again later. Send us an email if you liked this, if you'd like to hear more about this, or you have other thoughts or feedback. You can send us an email, podcast@concealedcarry.com, or you can go to the website and write a comment on this show's episode. Thank you, everyone, for participating today, and thank you, Bryan, for your great insights.
Appreciate it. See you guys soon.
So from the Concealed Carry podcast, thank you for participating. Be sure to subscribe, write a review, help us out here. Be sure to go to concealedcarry.com first to do your shopping for your tactical firearm and other training-related tools and gear. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Remember to train right, train often, and train safe so you can fight hard, fight fast, and fight true. Take care, everyone.